Hello, welcome to my channel, Devops with Prasanna. This is day 6 in Learn AWS in 30 Days series. Today we are going to talk about identity and access management. In short, it's called AWS IAM. Yeah, let's get started. Let's consider a scenario where a new developer is joining your team. Okay, and he wants access to EC2 instance, S3 bucket, load balancers, few things which we discussed yesterday. So, like what you will do. So, in this case, the process is to create something called as IAM user, and for this particular developer, let's say like the developer's name is Gokul. Okay, he is a developer. So we have to create a IAM user for Gokul, and then we have to give certain permissions to him, so he can perform operations like create EC2 instance, delete the EC2 instance, or create load balancers and things like that. Okay. So this is the role of IAM in AWS, like to create users. It's a managed service to create users who can have access to AWS resources. That is the idea. So there are like two components here. One is authentication, the other one is authorization. The authentication, it's a very generic concept. So authentication in the sense, when we say the user Gokul is logging in, how will ensure like only Gokul is logging in? That is achieved using something called username and password, or some kind of keys, okay, which we'll talk about later. But so like whenever we create IAM user, we can create this username, password, or we can create keys, and using those information, we'll be authenticating that okay, he is a corresponding user who's logging into the system. Okay. Now comes the second part. For example, as we say, he should have access only to EC2 and load balancer. Because he is a developer, like let's take an example, like he should not have access to a billing system, AWS cost, which means there is some kind of permission involved here. Okay, so this permission is called as policies in AWS IAM. So we'll create a policy document saying that this particular user should have access to EC2 and load balancer only, and then we'll attach this policy to the user. So that's how it is being achieved, and this is called authorization. So authentication is like verifying he is a right user or not. Authorization is like checking whether he has a permission to do that activity or not. So that is a very simple explanation of authentication and authorization. Before jumping into the demo of creating an IAM user and things like that, we will see one more concept. So when it comes to IAM, there are three main topics which you have to understand. One is user, the other one is group, third one is role. So we talked about user. Okay. Now we'll talk about groups. It's a it's a very generic concept. Again, like let's take an example. Like a new user is coming here, and he is a developer. Okay. So there are two ways in which to attach a policy. So we discussed about the policy document, right? Like there are two ways to attach a policy to user. Either we can attach the policy directly to a user. Policy is nothing but a JSON documentation, which will list down like what are the operations this user can do. So we can directly attach this policy to user, or we can create a set of groups. For example, we can create three groups, let's say. This is a developers group, this is marketing, and say like the third one is testers group. Okay. So we can create groups and we can attach policies to the groups. So what can happen is like whenever a new user comes in, we'll just add this user to the group. So we'll add the user to this group. And because policies are attached to this group, by default, this user will inherit those permissions from this group. And if you want to remove a user, it's very simple for us to remove a user. So by this way, we can ensure like all the users will have similar, all the developers will have similar set of permissions. All the marketing people will have similar set of permissions. So this can be achieved using groups, and that is a recommended way also. Instead of giving individual access to developers, individual access to users, try to create groups and attach policies to groups. So that is a way to go. Yeah, before jumping into like to understand more about the policies, there is a concept called least privilege permission, least privilege rule, least privilege policy. What this means is, for example, like as we say, like the new developer is coming to your company, joining your company. There are two ways in which we can give access to this developer to EC2 instance and load balancer. The first way is we can make this developer as an administrator, which means it's like a wildcard. Like he has access to all the resources in AWS, in the AWS account which you have. That is one way. The second way is like giving the access only to EC2 and load balancer. So obviously, you know, like what is the right option to choose? The right option to choose is to only give permission, only give the necessary permission. So that is called as least privilege policy, meaning if a IAM user requires access to this service, then he should get access only to that service, not to everything. So that is something which you should keep in mind whenever you're creating a policy and you're giving permissions to the IAM user. Because all these things is like giving access to your infrastructure. So which means you have to be like very conscious about the policies you are assigning to the permissions you are giving to the user. So that is the case. Now we'll just quickly look at the policy document, and then we'll go into a hands-on demo. Cool. So when it comes to policies, there are two type of policies. One is AWS managed policy, the other one is custom policy. AWS managed sense like this will by default come in all the AWS accounts. For example, like EC2 full access, S3 full access, and all those permissions will be there by default. We just have to go and assign it to a user or group. Okay. Custom policy is something which we are going to create by ourselves. That is a custom policy. So to give the policy document to give a feel of how it look like, I've taken a very simple case. Okay, this is administrator access policy. This is as you can see, this is a AWS managed policy. So AWS managed one. It's called administrator access, which means give access to all the resources. That is this policy is about. So it will contain multiple fields. The first one is version. The second one is statement. So the statement is something which we are interested in. It is an array, and this will contain objects in this fashion. There are a few more properties also, but in a very simple case, these are the three important properties. The effect is whether to allow or deny. Action is what is the action it should be, like whether it's a get or a put or whatever it is, delete or whatever it is. And resources on what resource this action should happen. For example, if you are going to view all the EC2 instance, then action would be like list, something like list colon something like that. We'll see the exact permissions later in the demo, but it will have something like list EC2, and resource will be like EC2 instance, EC2 service. So like if we say star, which means like it will have it can do all the operation on all the resources. So that is this administrator policy is about. I think cool. Like we have other topics to discuss, but before going into that, we'll see a quick demo, and we'll talk about one best practice also. Yeah. So this is my AWS console. Go to IAM. So as you can see, we have various things like user groups, users, roles, policies. So first we'll go to user. And one more thing, like the best practice is always to create a IAM user and use that IAM user. If you remember, like till now, we are using the root account. which means like whatever like the email ID which we gave to create this AWS account, that's what we are using here. And it is not a recommended practice. Even for me, like going onwards, I'm going to create a IAM user and I'm going to use that IAM user only. I'll not be using the root user. So I'll come to this users. Okay, so I already have one user here, but I'll create one more user. Yeah, Google. And I'll say the user access, he should have access to AWS Management Console, which means this particular web UI. I'll say I want to create a IAM user. I want to give a custom password. Okay, and then I'll say I don't want to sign in the next attempt. So that is like one catch here. So for example, if you are creating user for some other person, it is always recommended to auto-generate the password and ask them to change the password in their first login for the security reasons. Okay, but this is something some user which I'm going to use. Okay, so we got the user. Now either like we can add this user to a group, or we can copy permissions directly, or we can attach policies directly. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to yeah, maybe like I'll attach the policies directly. I'll say administrator. Okay, and then I'll say next. Then I'll say create user. Cool. So like okay, yeah. So now we have created the user and we know the password also. I'll now what I'll do is I'll show you how to log in as an IAM user. Um, for that, maybe I'll just do one more thing. So if you go to your dashboard, you can see this is your account ID. So each and every individual AWS account will get a unique ID. But this is very difficult to remember. So I'll create an alias for this. Learn AWS. 30 days. Okay. I can say create alias. So I could able to create this one. So my sign-in URL will be something like this. Learn AWS in 30 days. Sign in and things like that. So I'll copy this one. I'll use a different browser. Okay. Okay. So you can see the things got changed a little bit. Now there is a 12-digit account ID or account alias. So in this, we populated as learn AWS in 30 days, and we are going to log in as Gokul with the password. So this is a way to use your AWS account going forward. So please create a IAM user and start using IAM user. Yeah, so you can see IAM user is Gokul. Okay, this is cool. So now what we are going to do is, for example, because this user is administrator user, he can go to EC2, he can check everything. So all the permissions are allowed for this user. Maybe what I'll do is I'll try to remove the permissions for this user. Let's say Gokul. If I go to the user, you can see the permission is here. I'll say remove this administrator permission, which means this user Gokul is still a valid user, but he can't do any operations because there is no permissions attached to him. So if I go and refresh this page, you can see like this user is not allowed to authorize to perform this operation. This user is a valid user, but he is not authorized. The authorization is missing here. Okay, so instead of giving attaching the permission directly, I'll add this user to a group. So I'll add user to groups. I'll say, let's say like I'm adding him to developer group, which means, okay, maybe like I can create one more group. I'll go to user groups. I'll create a group called marketing team. I'll add Gokul user to this marketing team and I'll say they should have access only to S3 bucket. S3, even here I'm seeing it as S3 full access, but maybe I can give S3 read-only access. I will say create group. So there are two groups here. One group, if I go to this marketing group, they have the permission to read S3 buckets. S3 is a storage unit, which we are going to see in the next session. But if you see the policy here, this is similar to the policy which we saw before. So there is a statement, list of statements. Effect is allow. Action is they can do S3 get star, which means all the operations which starts with get, it is allowed. All the operation which starts with list, it is allowed. Describe, and all the other things are allowed. This is for all the S3 buckets or S3 resources. Okay, so this is the idea. Now we created groups and we added the group user Gokul to that group. Now what I'll do is, if I go here and if I refresh this page, you can see this user is not allowed to perform this operation because he don't have access to EC2 instance. He has access only to S3. So we go to S3. You can see if we go to S3 buckets, so there are no buckets because I haven't created any buckets. But the catch here is there is no authorization issue here. For example, I'm going to add Gokul user to one more group, which is the developers group. Okay, so now Gokul is part of two groups. From one group, he is getting access to S3, other group, he is getting access to EC2 instance. So if I come here again, I'm still at a Gokul user. If I refresh this page, he'll be having access to S3. If I go to EC2 instance, he'll be having access to EC2 instance also. So this is the idea. Cool. I think we talked about users, groups, and then we'll just see the custom policies. Okay. So you can see all these policies are AWS managed policy. You can see a box here, which means it's AWS managed. And this will be available in all the AWS accounts. But now we are going to create a custom policy. So specify choose a service. I'll say the services IAM. Okay, I can do all the operations in IAM, and resources is all the resources. Okay, I can check the JSON version of this thing. So you can see JSON version is allow IAM star resources star. Maybe I'll go back here. This is a security warning because I've given the star permission. So this is for the demonstration purpose. So I gave the star. But in general, you should only give access to the exact resource which you want to give access to. So that is the idea. Okay. So this is fine. So this is a policy editor. We can either use UI or we can directly edit in the JSON document also. So I'll go to the next page. I'll say my IAM policy, custom IAM policy. Okay, and then I can create this policy. So if I go to the, if I search for my IAM policy, you can see the custom IAM policy is here with all the things which we discussed, which we gave in the permissions. Cool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to attach this policy directly to user. But before that, for example, this Gokul user, if I go to IAM and if I go to IAM and if I see the list of users, okay, by default he's getting all the IAM policies. Okay, let me see how to avoid this. Okay. I think somehow I added this custom IAM policy to this user. I didn't recognize this. But what I'll do is I'll remove this one. So he could able to see all the users and groups because this Gokul user has access to this custom IAM policy. Now I'm going to remove this policy. So it is coming as part of developers group. So what I'll do is I'll remove this group developer. Okay, so now he only has access to marketing, which means if I go and do a refresh here, you can see the IAM list group permission is not available for this user Gokul. So I can't do this operation. So this is a catch. So we can create a custom IAM custom policy document, or we can use AWS managed policy and we can attach it to a user or a group so that like proper authorization will happen there. Okay, great. So we'll go to the next topic now, which is what are the ways in which a user can access the AWS resources. For example, the user in the sense he is a IAM user. Okay, so IAM user either he can go directly to the web browser and he can go to the link which we showed before, which will have the account IDs learn AWS in 30 days, and then he can access all the resources based on the permissions which he has. That is like there are two other ways in which he can access the AWS resources. One is command line access, the other one is programmatic access. Command line access in the sense like there is a CLI utility given by AWS. It's called the AWS CLI. CLI stands for command line interface. So there is a version 2 which we are going to use. But to have this access from command line, we need to create something called as access keys and secret keys. Once we have this access key and secret key, we can use AWS CLI and talk to the resources. Okay. So we'll see how to create this access key and secret key. So I'm again here as a root user, and I'm in the user Google. I'll go to security credentials. You can see he has access to console, and this is a console link which he is going to use. There is something called access keys. So what we are going to do is we are going to create a new access key, and you can see this sends programmatic calls to AWS from CLI, PowerShell, and other command line tools. So I'm going to use it for command line. These are some of the recommendations. Like either we can use Cloud Shell or things like that, which we'll see in the later sessions. But as of now, I'll create this one. It's for so this is demo purpose, and this is also like one important thing which you have to understand. This keys is something which should be kept very secure way. So if someone has access to these keys, they can do anything with your AWS account. So what I'm going to do is like I'm going to show you this access key and secret key, but once the demo is over, I'll be like I'll inactivate this key and I'll delete this key also. So please keep this in mind. Your access key and secret key is like your bank username and password. So like keep it as secure as possible. Okay, cool. So I'll show the secret key and access key. Yeah, but as I mentioned, like I'll be deleting this one. So yeah. So, but somehow like I should set up my CLI to use these keys, right? So that's where like the AWS CLI commands comes in picture. So you can download the AWS CLI version 2 for Linux, macOS, and Windows. These are the instructions given. So I've already installed the AWS CLI. So if I go here, the AWS version, I can see there are a lot of text, but I think it's -F version. But this is how we should use the AWS CLI. So to use this one, what I'll do is I'll say AWS configure. It will ask for access key. So this is my access key. It will ask for secret key. It will ask for region. I'll say AP South 1. The region is AP South 1. Yeah. Output format is fine. Yeah. So this is done. So what this is going to do is it's going to create a file called AWS/credentials in your local. So and then it will add the access key and secret key here. Okay, so this is going to be my default user and credentials. to use this AWS command line tool. So now if I try to do AWS S3 LS, you can see there is no result being returned because there is no buckets available in the S3. Just EC2. Okay, cool. So this is what we were trying to do. When I say AWS EC2 describe instances, I'll get a message saying that you are not authorized to perform this operation. Because if you remember, we removed this permission from this Gokul user. So what I'll do is I'll go here. I'll go back to Gokul user. I'll add this user to developers group, which means he'll be having access to EC2 instance. Now, if I go and try this, EC2 display instance because no identity policy based on go to developers full access. EC2 full access, which means EC2 colon star is allowed. Okay, I think yeah, it got cached or something. But I could able to see all the list of instances because this user has corresponding permission to do this operation. So you got the bottom line, right? Like whatever I can do from AWS console, I can do the same thing from the CLI also. If AWS console can't do that operation, CLI will also, it can't do that same operation. Okay, so that is the idea. Like it will have the same authorization parameters. Cool. I think like this is what I want to talk about the command line access. Programmatic access in the sense it is about like for example, if you want to create a EC2 instance from another EC2 instance using program in the sense either Python code or Java code or JavaScript, you can manage the AWS resources. So that is the programmatic access. Programmatic access and managing the AWS services. And in this case, like there are two ways to do that. Either you can have the access key and secret key, like how we saw. First, for let's take an example actually. Maybe like to demonstrate like what is a programmatic access is. Let's say you have a EC2 instance and you have a Python application, which will go and create another EC2 instance or it will stop the EC2 instance. So it can do start or stop another EC2 instance. Okay. So in this case, if you remember, like you should have the permission like EC2 colon, maybe like let's say list access, put access, and things like that. Okay, it should have the proper EC2 colon permissions. Okay, like in the worst case, we can have the EC2 full access permission. So somehow like we should this instance should have this. So there are two ways in which you can set this permission. First way is create the AWS access key, secret key, SSH into the machine, and then add it to the .credentials file, like how we did it in my local. This is like first way to do it, but it is not a recommended way because if someone got access to these keys, access key and secret key, like they can also like able to create a new instance. They can also able to stop an instance, which is not a proper way. You definitely can't ensure these keys will not be leaked. There are like a lot of ways in which the keys can be leaked. For example, unknowingly, some developer can add these keys to a GitHub and then push it to a GitHub repository. So there are like many ways for the keys to get leaked out. So this is not a recommended one, but the recommended way is to use something called as IAM roles. So this is a second approach, like using IAM role. Okay, IAM role in the sense, for example, if there is like one EC2 service wants to access another EC2 service. In this case, this EC2 instance, which is a AWS service, it wants to manage another AWS service, which is another EC2 instance, or it wants to manage the S3 buckets, list the files in S3 bucket or things like that. Okay. So in this case, the recommended way is to use something called as a role. So we'll see how to create a role, how to attach it to an instance and things like that now. Okay, so I'm here. There is something called as roles. Okay, I'll create a new role. This is going to be used by AWS Service, and the use case is EC2. Okay, so allows EC2 instances to call AWS services on your behalf. I'll go to next. Let's say give EC2 full access, and then I'll say next. I'll say can manage other EC2 instances, and that's it. I'll say create role. Cool. So this is a IAM role which we have created, and we have to attach this IAM role to the EC2 instances. Maybe I'll quickly create a EC2 instance. If I go to launch instance, I'll say this is test mission. I'll say Amazon Linux is fine. Instance type T2 is fine. Key pair is this. Network is fine. We'll just select one thing from here. We'll go to advanced. So in the IAM instance profile, you can see the instance profile which we created, which is EC2 full access role. Okay. So if I give this, so by default, that EC2 instance, like whatever the EC2 instance which we are going to create, it will have all the permissions to manage the other EC2 instances. So it is as simple as that. Like when creating the instance itself, we have to define all those things. So if we do this, we don't have to create a new access key and secret key and then run the AWS configure command and copy the keys there. So all those things are not needed. We just have to select this IAM instance profile. Okay, so I think like we are at the end of the session. Hopefully you have learned about IAM and things like that. There is one best practice which I want to discuss. Maybe I'll cover it as part of another session. That is about setting up the MFA, multi-factor like two-factor authentication. So we'll do it in a separate session. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for joining me. Happy learning. Bye bye.